Today's video is sponsored by Train Sim World 4, of whom more in a bit. In my recent videos on the Overground, a fair few people based outside of London asked, what actually is the Overground? How is it defined? How does it differ from the Underground or the Elizabeth Line or even regular railways? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, it's a curious thing. So, what exactly is the Overground? The simple and frankly unhelpful answer is, it's all the lines grouped together under the Overground brand. It's hard to be more specific because there isn't really that much that makes them unique as compared to other railway lines. Which brings us to the bigger question, which is, why is the Overground? Well, I'm going to start this story a little over 100 years ago. In the early 20th century, it was well recognised that the railways were not the licence to print money that their promoters had hoped. As a matter of fact, a lot of the major companies were, not to put too fine a point on it, basically broke. So in 1921, the Railways Act was passed. The idea was to group the railways together so that the rich lines could prop the poor lines up. Now, initially the plan was to divide things up by geography. Railways would be grouped into regions. Most versions of this plan had London as a separate region. Even back then, London was the largest and most densely populated city in the UK, and its commuter trains were phenomenally busy. Most of its railways were already allied in the Underground group, with the Metropolitan Railway and the North London Railway also getting involved in collective decisions. But doing things geographically was controversial because many companies owned some highly illogical lines. For instance, the Midland Railway, which would fall into the northwestern geographical group, owned the line to Tilbury and Southend, which was firmly in the southeast. Then there were several companies for whom London commuter trains were their largest source of income. How would the shareholders be compensated for that? So it was decided instead to do things by company, with all the silliness that entailed. The grouping took place in 1923. The London commuter lines stayed with the company that currently owned them. Those companies would be folded into the larger new companies. As a compromise, the Underground lines would remain independent with the exception of the London and South Western Railway-owned Waterloo and City line, which would spend the next 71 years being an Underground line in all but name. In 1948, the railways were nationalised, although again the Underground remained its own separate thing, grouped together with buses and trams. British Railways, the new nationalised network, was divided into regions that were broadly similar to the old grouping companies. There was additionally a Scottish region and, for a time, a northeastern region. Nationalisation brought with it a demand for financial accountability. If a railway was not profitable, the government was not willing to subsidise it. The trouble was that railways, on the whole, are not profitable. This period coincided with an increase in car ownership, so what happened was that railways made less money, so they received less investment, so they became less attractive to ride, so they made less money, in a vicious circle. In most parts of the country, this resulted in railways being closed altogether. But even an underused line in London was still busy, so there were few closures. Just a lot of very unhappy passengers on crowded, rattling, dirty trains. If you'd like a far better experience of trains in London, I'd recommend Train Sim World 4, who are partnering with me for this video. Train Sim World 4 allows you to experience the railway in the best possible way, from the driver's cab, and now you can enter Goblin mode with the Suffragette Line add-on. It's an Aventura adventure, yes, I said that. Wait, what's that? Overground not really your thing? Well, it's a bit weird that you're watching this video, but alright. How about taking the helm of this centenarian behemoth? With the deluxe edition, you can experience the fantastical adventure of driving Flying Scotsman without going bankrupt. Impossible? Not with Train Sim World 4. Or if you want something more modern, how about an Azuma or a Class 66? With livery designer, scenario planner, free roam mode and formation designer, which is available as a beta for PC players, you can make your train look however you like, haul whatever you like, send it wherever you like, and even choose the weather, which is more than you can say for public transport in the real world. Train Sim World 4 is available on Steam, Epic, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and Xbox Series S. Check it out using the link in the description below. So, that's how you experience the railway now, but let's return to the questionably good old days. Well, not a whole lot changed on British Rail until 1982, when Sectorization came in. This divided British Rail up not by region or historic company, but by type of traffic. One of the sectors was London and South Eastern, which finally recognised that these lines really needed to be their own specific thing. Under director Chris Green, the sector became Network South East, and this brought with it investment. The era of Network South East was less than a decade, but it's still fondly remembered by commuters and rail enthusiasts alike. More importantly, though, what it showed was that if you invested in railways, that investment would be repaid in more passengers, happier passengers, and, unbelievably, in profits. A precedent had been set. And then privatization happened. Between 1994 and 1997, Britain's railways were sold off to individual companies. What this meant was that railways being profitable went from being a hopeful goal to an absolute necessity. And this brought a decline. Commuter railways in London were essentially a captive market, given how busy the roads were, and that there really wasn't much by way of competition. And franchises were allocated in periods of around 7 years, which wasn't enough in the minds of companies to justify investment when they might not see any benefits or profits resulting. The North London line, operated by Silverlink, became notorious. On paper it was doing pretty well, but its rolling stock was aging. The Class 313 units that formed the majority of their services were overcrowded and not well suited to large numbers of standing passengers. Trains were often cancelled at short notice. I can confirm all this. I used the line quite a bit back in 2000. The Gospel Oak to Barking line, nicknamed the Goblin, was even worse, operating with 2-coach diesel trains twice an hour, which is absolutely nothing for a London commuter line. I specify for a London commuter line, in the perhaps futile hope of forestalling the usual people complaining that their local line only gets one train every 17 years or whatever. Also in 2000, London Transport, the organisation responsible for, transport in London, was reorganised into Transport for London. Large parts of that sentence felt redundant. TfL had, and indeed still has, a broader remit and greater powers than the old organisations. And therefore, following discussions with the Department for Transport, they were able to take the North London line and the Goblin over in 2007. In 2010, the East London line was added to the map. This had formerly been an underground line, but had now been extended. In 2012, the North and East London lines were joined by the South London line, giving London an orbital commuter railway. This was something that had been campaigned for by various organisations since the 1970s. But that wasn't all. The Lee Valley lines from Liverpool Street to Chingford, Enfield and Cheshunt joined the fun in 2015. So did the odd one out, the Little Romford to Upminster line. Several other lines have been proposed for inclusion over the years, such as the Northern City line, the Greenford to West Ealing line, and the South Western Railway suburban routes. All this is a very rambling way of saying the Overground is a complex thing. Unlike other TfL railway networks, such as the DLR or the trams, it wasn't devised as a singular entity. Really, it's a rebranding of several pretty disparate lines that were in need of investment and improvement. However, bringing the lines together under a single brand and operator has advantages. These are kind of paradoxical. The larger the network is, the simpler and cheaper it is to invest. For example, these lines now all use the same kinds of trains and equipment. The trains are either the Class 378 Capital Stars or the Class 710 Aventras. More trains per order means a lower cost of train per unit. Maintenance is simpler. Trains can be moved between lines to cover shortages. And coordination is easier, not only between overground lines, but with other TfL services. As a result of all this, investment is much easier. Lines have seen new rolling stock, electrification on non-electrified lines, improvements in station facilities, more frequent services, extensions of existing services, and even the reopening of closed lines. This has resulted in increases in passengers. So if it's a railway, if it's a commuter line, if it's in the London area, it could become an overground line. So I return to my earlier answer. An overground line is a line operated under the Overground brand. But really, it's in the journey. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the electrification to my goblin. I'd also like to thank Train Sim World 4 for sponsoring today's video. Experience the Overground in a new way by following the link in the description below. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.